In the Middle Ages, the Inquisition did not rise from a sudden burst of cruelty, nor from an isolated wave of fanaticism. It emerged from something far older and far deeper, a fear of losing control over the human soul, and in that vast spiritual battlefield, women, their bodies, their influence, their independence became central targets. Beginning in the 13th century, the Catholic Church created a judicial institution dedicated to identifying, judging, and correcting heresy. Officially, it was meant to defend the faith, protect the community, and save souls from error. But behind that mission lay a structure capable of crushing lives, a system that treated the body, especially the female body, as a piece of evidence, a battlefield, and a threat. Medieval Christian thought, influenced by theologians like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, built a vision of womanhood, deeply rooted in suspicion. The female body was believed to be unstable, fragile, and dangerously close to temptation. The mortal woman existed outside male authority. Widows, healers, midwives, solitary women, the more she embodied risk, not because of her actions, but because of what she represented. This ideological foundation did not remain abstract. It became policy. It became procedure. It became violence legitimized by faith. Across the archives of Toulouse, Carcassonne, Toledo, Sibier, Bamberg, and Nuremberg, a pattern emerges with striking clarity. The female body was treated as an object of inquiry, suspicion, and control. A woman arrested under inquisitorial authority no longer belonged to herself. She was isolated, stripped of protection, and placed in a world where truth was not discovered, but manufactured. One of the most revealing examples appears in the Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487, a manual that would influence judicial methods for generations. It presented the female body as porous, weak, susceptible to corruption and diabolical influence, an argument that justified the most intrusive procedures. Inspections became exhaustive. Privacy disappeared. The search for the so-called marks of the devil transformed the body into a landscape of suspicion, where every scar, every blemish, every irregularity could be interpreted as evidence. What modern historians understand is simple. These practices were not exceptions. They were not the result of isolated cruelty or local excesses. They were part of a coherent system built, codified, and taught. And behind the legal vocabulary, the cold administrative tone of the registers, lies a truth far more disturbing. The Inquisition did not only seek confession, it sought submission. Under inquisitorial doctrine, a confession was the only acceptable path to truth. And if an accused person refused to speak, the institution allowed the use of pressure, a term that concealed a wide spectrum of coercive methods. Officially, these methods were not meant to wound or kill. In reality, the boundaries between allowed and forbidden were porous, easily crossed, and often ignored. The goal was not justice. The goal was certainty, a certainty imposed from above. The female body, viewed as morally unstable and spiritually vulnerable, became a primary target of this system. Many women were accused not for what they had done, but for what they might be capable of. A dream, a rumor, a whispered accusation, a neighbor's suspicion, anything could ignite a process that ended in ruin. The records show how isolated stories were shaped, redirected, or constructed entirely under pressure. The accused, exhausted and terrified, repeated what was expected of them. Their confessions often mirrored the fantasies and anxieties of the judges themselves. What emerges from these documents is not simply violence, but a worldview, a vision of the female body as a gateway to disorder, a vessel of uncertainty, a danger that needed to be supervised, punished, and contained. And so, through doctrine and procedure, the female body became a juridical object, a theological concern, a threat. The impact extended far beyond those arrested. Fear spread through entire communities. Women learned to move quietly, to avoid suspicion, to hide their knowledge and skills. Folk medicine, previously passed from mothers to daughters, became risky. Independence became dangerous. Silence became survival. This first part reveals a fundamental truth about the Inquisition. It did not simply punish individuals. It reshaped society. It created an atmosphere where the female body was viewed not as human, but as evidence of potential error. And the institution used that fear to strengthen its authority. In the next part, We will explore how this system evolved, how suffering became codified, how procedures hardened into routine, and how the quest for spiritual purity transformed into an organized structure of physical and psychological domination. By the beginning of the 14th century, something fundamental had changed inside the machinery of the Inquisition. A machine with gears made of rules, manuals, and procedures. It became its method. The manuals of the period, written by theologians and jurists, reveal the transformation with chilling clarity. They describe the steps an inquisitor should follow when an accused woman refused to speak. The language is clinical, precise, and deliberately detached. Terms like moderate pressure and advanced pressure appear, repeatedly phrases that seem harmless until one realizes what they enabled. The objective was simple: a confession, not truth, not as just the confirmation of what the institution already believed. In this procedural universe, the female body became a terrain mapped, inspected, and categorized. The same ideological foundations that portrayed women as spiritually vulnerable were now embedded into official doctrine. Manuals insisted that bodily suffering could reveal hidden elite, that endurance under pressure indicated deception, and that the weakening of the body purged the influence of evil. The line between theology and law dissolved. Archives from German and Italian tribunals reveal repeated references to methods applied specifically to women. These documents rarely describe the techniques directly. Instead, they hide behind euphemisms like clarification or examination. Yet the consequences are clear in the testimonies that survived. Women emerged physically and psychologically shattered, their voices silenced long before any verdict was pronounced. This was not an accident, it was the point. Obedience created order. Order reinforced the authority of the institution. The accused were often women with little social protection: widows, healers, migrants. Women who lived alone or practiced forms of knowledge inherited from older traditions. Their vulnerability made them easy targets in a world where communal suspicion could spark legal disaster. A whispered rumor, a sudden misfortune, a neighbor's resentment, anything could be used as justification for inquiry. Once inside the system, the path forward was narrow and treacherous. Refusal to confess was interpreted as evidence of deeper guilt. Compliance was taken as validation of the accusation. Either way, the institution strengthened its belief in its own correctness. The process did not seek truth. It sought confirmation. Historical records show how aggressively the narrative was shaped by the judges themselves. Across Bamberg, Würzburg, and other European centers, dozens of testimonies recorded during these years are astonishingly so similar, in fact, that modern historians can map entire regional belief systems based solely on the patterns embedded in the confessions. This uniformity tells one thing clearly: the stories did not originate in the minds of the accused. Communities learned to police themselves. Women avoided gatherings, silenced their opinions, concealed their skills. What makes this transformation particularly significant is the way it redefined suffering. Pain was no longer perceived as an unfortunate consequence. It became a theological tool. The more the body trembled, the more they believed the spirit might be cleansed. But the testimonies tell another story, one of exhaustion, despair, and resignation. Many women understood, early in the process, that resistance only prolonged the ordeal. Confession became a survival strategy, not a statement of truth. The Inquisition interpreted this as proof of accuracy. Thus, the cycle continued. What emerged from this era was not merely a judicial institution, but a worldview, a belief that spiritual order required physical domination, that purity required suffering, that certainty justified coercion. And through this worldview, the female body became a battleground where ideology shaped reality. In the next chapter, we will leave the interrogation chamber and enter the public sphere, where punishment became spectacle, fear became communal, and humiliation became a tool of social control. In many European cities, inquisitorial officials led accused women through the streets before any formal sentence had even been pronounced. The purpose was not merely transportation, it was display. The weakened figure of a woman, escorted by guards, head lowered, body marked by exhaustion, became a silent message. This is what happens when order is challenged. Humiliation became a public ritual, carefully orchestrated, It was exposure. In medieval society, a woman's reputation was her form of existence. To be publicly displayed as accused, even before trial, was enough to break her standing, her relationships, her future. Shame struck deeper than any physical blow. Public readings added another layer to this destruction. Accusations shaped, exaggerated, or entirely constructed were recited aloud for the community. They spoke of forbidden acts, imagined alliances, whispered desires. The content mattered less than the impact. Once spoken, these words clung to the woman like a second skin, reshaping her identity in the eyes of her neighbors. She was no longer a person. She was a warning. Even after release, if release ever came, many women found their lives shattered beyond repair. Families distanced themselves. Friends turned silent. In small medieval communities, being marked by suspicion meant becoming an outcast, even without formal conviction. This is what historians refer to as extended punishment, a sentence delivered not by the tribunal, but by society itself. The Inquisition understood this dynamic and used it effectively. The public humiliation of one woman reinforced the obedience of hundreds. In some accounts, women were placed on raised platforms while officials read the accusations. They stood alone, elevated above a sea of faces, forced to hear descriptions of actions they had never committed. The spectacle served two purposes. It broke the individual and strengthened collective fear. Spectacle thrives on narrative, and the Inquisition provided one. The accused woman transformed from neighbor to symbol, from familiar presence to embodiment of danger. The more vivid the accusations, the more the public believed that evil lurked among them. The more the woman trembled, the more her fear validated the narrative constructed around her. As fear spread, women began to change their own behavior in response. The institution no longer needed to act. Directly, society policed itself. Fear did not stay confined to adults. Children witnessed these public scenes, absorbing them into their understanding of morality, authority, and gender. The message was unmistakable. The female body was vulnerable, suspect, and subject to inspection and judgment at any time. The echo that never faded by the end of the Middle Ages. The structure of the Inquisition began to shift. Critics emerged, jurists, physicians, even members of the clergy who questioned the methods that claimed to defend the faith, but seemed instead to destroy lives. These voices were few, often ignored, and sometimes silenced, but they signaled the beginning of a slow, uneven transformation. The trials became less frequent. Manuals were revised, procedures evolved, but the end of an institution does not guarantee the end of its influence. The women who endured inquisitorial judgment did not simply return to ordinary life. Many carried wounds, visible or unseen, that shaped the way they moved through the world, and even when the tribunals themselves weakened, the culture of fear they had created lingered. Historians emphasize a critical truth. The Inquisition did not only punish beautés, it rewired societies. The way medieval Europeans thought about women, about desire, about moral danger, changed profoundly during these centuries. The idea that the female body was inherently suspect, that it needed supervision, correction, and restraint, survived long after the tribunals stopped operating. The violence ended. The logic did not. Across Europe, the echoes of inquisitorial thinking appeared in medical practices, legal codes, and religious teachings. The scrutiny of women's beautés through forced examinations, public shaming, or moral policing did not vanish with the final sentences of the inquisitors. Instead, it became woven into everyday life, disguised under new institutions or new names. Many cultural patterns emerged from this inheritance. Silence became a virtue for women. To speak boldly was dangerous. To possess knowledge, influence, or authority invited suspicion. Desire became associated with guilt. Even centuries later, moral discourse continued to frame female sexuality as something that required vigilance and control. The body became an object of judgment, from medical examinations to social expectations. The idea that a woman's body held hidden, meaning evidence of sin, deception, or danger remained deeply rooted. The influence of the Inquisition can even be traced in later witch hunts, moral campaigns, and the rigid structures of early modern society. In each case, the female body was treated as a potential threat, something to be inspected, regulated, or subdued, not because of specific acts, but because of what society believed it could represent. What is most striking is how these ideas were preserved not only through laws, but through memories. Generations of women grew up watching their mothers and grandmothers move, with caution, avoiding judgment, avoiding attention, avoiding danger. This quiet inheritance shaped Europe more powerfully than any decree. Inquisitorial documents reveal something else. The bureaucratic tone of the records hides the human cost. The cold language of examination, procedure, or confession erases the pain endured by the accused. By reducing suffering to administrative terms, the institutions learn to ignore the reality of the victims. This distancing, this emotional detachment, did not disappear. It became a model for future systems of control. The historian studying these archives is forced to confront a disturbing paradox. The Inquisition claimed to purify society, but instead it created a legacy of fear, silence, and distortion. Its greatest victims were not only those who suffered directly, but the generations that inherited a worldview forged in intimidation. To study these events is not to condemn the past with modern eyes. It is to recognize how easily a society can allow violence to disguise itself as virtue, how institutions can justify harm through the language of morality, how the human body can become a battleground for ideology. This is why remembering matters. When we recount these stories, we do more than resurrect forgotten suffering. We expose the mechanisms that allowed it to flourish. We understand how faith, law, and fear can combine to reshape reality, and we identify the patterns that continue in different forms, even today. The Inquisition teaches a lesson that is larger than its time. It shows how power behaves when left unquestioned. It shows how easily vulnerability becomes a target. It shows how entire societies can convince themselves that injustice is righteousness. Most of all, it reminds us that the voices of the oppressed, those who were silenced, shamed, or arrested, are essential to understanding the truth of any era. In telling their stories, we restore what the institution tried to destroy: their humanity. This series does not aim to shock, it aims to illuminate, to reveal how a system built on fear can endure long after its walls crumble, to show that history's darkest chapters are not merely episodes to remember, but warnings to carry forward. The women caught in the machinery of the Inquisition were ordinary people, mothers, daughters, widows, healers swept into a storm much larger than themselves. They did not choose their fate, but their suffering reshaped the world around them. Their testimony, though fragmented, stands as a monument to resilience, and long after its flames died out, its shadows continued to stretch across the centuries. To understand this story is to understand how darkness survives and how confronting it becomes an act of justice.